Fancy's Vlog! Hurrah! Okay, so I was asked the other day, what was my first ever gaming machine or computer? It's a bit sad really when I talk about this, because when you sort of, you know, listen to other YouTubers and their first gaming machines, it's always something really cool. Like, you know, the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, or, you know, the Master System, or the Mega Drive, or Genesis, if you're in America. And it's always something, you know, really amazing, really cool. But my first machine, my first gaming console, it wasn't a console, it was a computer, a home computer, wasn't cool at all. Yeah, it was rubbish. Basically, the first person in my house, in my family, to have anything to do with computers was my older brother. And he had the crappiest computer on earth. Look it up, have a Google of it. It was called the ZX81. Oh my god, it was crap. It was rubbish. You couldn't do anything on it. The most you could have was like a demo of some stickmen. It didn't have like Space Invaders, I don't think, or anything like that. It was just rubbish. It's utter tripe. And yeah, you know, but it kind of, I suppose, sparked my interest in games and things like that, because I thought, ooh, we've got a computer. And to be honest, you know, it wasn't much better than a transistor radio. It really was that bad in the very early 80s. And yeah, but I don't know if it was a year or two later, but, you know, obviously Christmas came and I asked for a computer myself. And, you know, I'd been watching loads of TV shows about computers. Yeah, at the time, I think the Spectrum was really starting to take off, you know. You had games like Jet Set Willy and things like that. And at school, you know, we had BBC microcomputers and you could play games like Daredevil Dennis, which was awesome at the time. You know, a little man on a motorbike just going along and hitting a jump and, you know, literally flying off the side of the screen. Daredevil Dennis, it was a classic. You know, but obviously, you know, a BBC computer, in those days, it was about 400 quid. Now, you know, nowadays, 400 quid is not as much money, okay? It's still expensive. I mean, for a games console, 400 quid's quite a bit. But, you know, unless a games console's just come out. But at the time, 400 quid was the equivalent of about 700 or 800 quid. You know, my family couldn't really afford that. Both my parents worked, but, you know, we weren't a rich family. So a load of my mates, they all had kind of Spectrums, which I think were sort of 150, 200 quid, something like that. And then I saw advertised the Amstrad CPC464. Oh, it rocked! And why did it rock? Because it came with a monitor. Oh yeah, you didn't plug it into the telly like you did with a Spectrum. It came with its own monitor, which I think appealed to my parents, because then they wouldn't have to like sit and watch me play games when really all they wanted to do is watch kind of Carnation Street or some other soap or Emmerdale Farm or whatever it was that they watched. And there was two types. There was two types of Amstrad CPC464. There was one that came with a colour monitor. Oh yeah, proper colour monitor it came with. It was all, you know, your machine would just slot straight into the colour monitor with a little wiggly wire. And it would plug straight in. It was brilliant. And then, the next one down, it wasn't black and white. Oh no. The next one down was green screen monitor. Oh yes. And guess which one I got? Yeah, that's right. I got the green screen monitor, which, you know, looking back on it, it was kind of a bit rubbish, but I was just excited to have my own computer, to be honest. And, you know, most games kind of looked a bit rubbish on a green screen monitor. Unless, of course, I guess you're playing an Incredible Hulk game, in which case it doesn't really make a lot of difference. But, you know, try playing a snooker game on a green screen monitor. It's not easy, because the balls, yeah, the green balls, admittedly, are green, but the white balls are green, and even the black ball, weirdly, is sort of blacky green. Everything was green. So, you know, if your game didn't rely on colour, you were alright. But, yeah, so that was my first computer, the Amstrad CPC464. And there was one other great thing about it. It had a tape recorder, sort of tape deck, built in at the side of the keyboard. So you basically put your cassette tape, and games were on cassette then back in the 80s, and you could buy them anywhere. You could buy a game in Boots back in the 80s. I know, Boots! When did Boots last sell games? Boots would sell them, Superdrug would sell games here in the UK. I don't know about in America, but you could buy games at the garage, you know, everywhere. Petrol stations would sell games. News agents would sell games, and they'd all be on crappy little cassettes, and they'd be about £2 each, and they were all, most of them I think were sort of home brews that were typed by people, you know, programmed by people at home, but probably by sort of teenagers, and then they'd sell them to one of the games companies that were just sort of starting up. There were companies like Mastertronic then, yeah, and I think Codemasters started around then with games like Dizzy. Dizzy was like a little egg. And you jump and spin, yeah, but he was basically an egg, and you go on this little adventure. It was all side-scrolling, but yeah, Codemasters, some of their early games were amazing. But yeah, so that was my first computer. And was it any good? In a word, no, it was rubbish. But, you know, I didn't know back then that it was rubbish, and so to me, it was amazing. You know, and we've still got, I think I've still got a green screen Amstrad at my parents' house somewhere, probably up in the loft or in the shed. Yeah, but it does bring back some great memories. And the other funny thing about the whole having games on cassettes was the fact that you'd put the cassette in, and you couldn't call it instant load, yeah? What I find really funny is when people moan about the PlayStation 4 or, you know, the Xbox One, and the fact that it might have to wait, you know, 10 seconds for a game to load. 10 seconds for a game to load? My golly, that's like living in some sci-fi realm in the year 4000. Games in those days, I think the worst ones were ones that didn't even come on one cassette tape. Sometimes games had like 3 or 4 cassette tapes, and guess what? You had to load them one by one, and each one would take sort of 5 to 10 minutes to load. Yeah, so if you were lucky, it was a game with just one cassette, and you'd load it, and it made the weirdest noise, because you'd plug it in, you press kind of play, and then you press 3 buttons on the Amstrad, control, delete, escape, or whatever it was. You had to press 3 buttons at the same time to get this loading thing to come up that said, press play and any key to load. So then you'd press play on the thing, and you press any key, and it would start loading up the game. But they take forever to load. And not only would they take forever to load, they'd make the weirdest noise, right? You knew if someone was playing a game in the 80s, and not just on the Amstrad, on the Spectrum or on the Commodore 64, because it made this noise. It would go on and on for ages. Anyone who's born or grew up in the 80s would know that noise. If they were a gamer, they would know what it was. And weirdly, I kind of miss that noise. It makes no sense, but the thing with games then were, one, they were a lot smaller, and you never had the expectation of anything being amazing in those days, because it was just amazing that you could play games at home. And, you know, some of the games that you had in those days were just utter rubbish. The first game I ever played on the Amstrad CPC464 was called Roland in the Caves, yeah? And what it was, I suppose it was kind of a bit like Donkey Kong in a way, but you played this little pixelated bloke called Roland. It was definitely, you know, a homebrew that got sold to Amstrad. And you'd play Roland, and you'd have to run sort of along through a sort of 2D cave and go up and down ropes and try and avoid some spiders. That was the whole game. There was nothing else. You couldn't shoot the spiders, you just had to avoid them. It was crap. There was another game, actually. Yeah, another one, because when you bought the Amstrad, you got about 10 different games with it. You got Roland on the Ropes, you got Roland in the Caves. Roland was like the main Amstrad. He was kind of like the Mario of Amstrad, and he was crap. But you got those. You got some Space Invaders game. The name eludes me for the moment. I've forgotten what it was called, but it was just your typical Yeah, that was the best game, to be honest. You just go left and right along the bottom and spaceships will come down and you have to shoot them. That was actually quite a good game. Even now, if I had to play it, you know, it's still quite a cool Space Invaders game. That was about the only thing they got right on the Amstrad. But one of the weirdest games they had was a game called Animal, Vegetable, Mineral. Yeah, this was a game in the 80s. Animal, Vegetable, Mineral. And what it was, well, it had two sides, this game, basically. One side was the computer would think of, say, a dog, yeah, but it wouldn't tell you. It wouldn't tell you it had thought of a dog. You know, you have to ask it questions. So, like, you know, does it have 4 legs? Does it have 4 legs? And the computer would go, yes. You think, oh, I've narrowed it down to an animal that has, oh, is it an animal? Is it animal, vegetable or mineral? That was always the first question, because then you narrow it down from it being a rock. Is it animal, vegetable or mineral? And the computer would say, animal. And then you could ask the 4-leg question. It would go, yes. And you go, ooh, I've narrowed it down. The computer's thinking of some kind of animal with 4 legs. And then you think, oh, is it a, hang on a minute, does it have a beard? Because obviously I'd be thinking like a goat. The computer would go, no. Oh, so it's not a goat. You know, do people ride this animal? Thinking of a horse. No. And you know, does this animal bark? Yes. And ooh, is it a dog? Yes, you've won. And that was animal, vegetable, mineral. And that was one side of it. But also you could play it the other way round, where you could sort of program your own things into the computer, and the computer would kind of learn. So for instance, you could basically lie, and that was the best thing about the game. So like, you think of something, you know, and at that age, all you really think about are kind of rude things like boobs, you know. So like, is it animal, vegetable or mineral, the computer would say on the screen. And you'd go, animal. And then it would be like, oh, does it have legs? Well, yeah, sort of. Because in your head you're thinking of boobs, you know. And so you say yes. And then it's like, does it bark? And then you go, I'll say it barks. Yes. Even though obviously boobs don't bark, but you go on. And you know, eventually the computer would, you know, give up after so many questions, and you type in what your thing was. So you type in boobs. Now by doing that, the computer had then memorised what the questions and answers were, and then it would have that information stored. So you'd think you were being really clever by having a thing in the animal, vegetable, mineral that was boobs, but actually all you'd done is messed up your game, because then you'd be playing it one day, you know, sort of a year later you'd be playing animal, vegetable, mineral, and it would be like, you know, does it have legs? Yes. And you wouldn't be able to remember what you'd written, and so it would get to a point where you go, I give up, what is it? And the computer would go, boobs. And you're like, boobs? But boobs don't have legs. They don't bark. Like that, and it would ruin your game. But anyway, that was the Amstrad CPC464. And yeah, the weirdest game. Animal, vegetable, mineral. There were a few good games on it, which maybe I'll talk about in another video. But yeah, I don't know if you had an Amstrad CPC464, if you were around the same generation as me. But if you did, let me know. I'd love to hear your stories, especially of animal, vegetable or mineral. Cheers. Bye.